Today we're going to make a macro that will draw a frame of a specific color. And what we want to do is, with this macro, give you all the controls necessary to customize this. So the things you might want to change with this is you would want to customize the width, the height, the thickness, the position, and the color. So you have 5 things you'd like to control. So let me first walk you through this so you can see what's going on. Dual display. The first node is a rectangle that is a mask. White is opaque, black is transparent. The second rectangle is also a mask, which I've inverted. So here, white is opaque, black is transparent, and if you click on one node, you can see its outline in both viewers. So if we select rectangle 2, which is on the right, you can see the size of the rectangle in viewer 1. Conversely, if you click on rectangle 1 and look at viewer 2, you can see the size of that rectangle as an outline. What we want to do is find where these two overlap, and that will give us just this hollow frame. And the way you can do that is you can chain these masks together, come over here to the paint mode and select multiply, because opaque or white is 1 and transparent or black is 0. So if you multiply pixel by pixel the values, the only time you're going to get a value of 1 is when it's 1 on both rectangles. And that is a nice little hack to create the intersection. I would have liked there to be a paint mode or a combine mode that just says intersection, but I think you'd have to go and work with booleans to make that happen. Lastly, we have our background node, and if we take this and use this as a mask for the background and display it, we get this nicely colored frame. Now, before we turn this into a macro and customize the interface, let's rename these nodes. So rectangle 1 is the outer rectangle. Rectangle 2 is the inner rectangle. Because if you use the default names for these nodes, it can be a little bit confusing when you start to do the customization process. In background, let's just call that frame color. I'm renaming them, by the way, just by pressing F2. So here we have the building blocks. It's not perfect, by the way. Notice how the vertical sides of the frame are thicker than the horizontal slides, and we'll fix that as well. The 5 controls we'd like to have, well, actually first, let me show you what you would do if you did not customize it, and then we'll start over and just customize it then. So let's go through and click the 3 nodes, right-click, come up to macro, and say create macro. When you do this, you get a pop-up, and it asks which of the controls from all these different nodes would you like to include in the output. So if we click outer rectangle, we'd like to include the width and the height and the center. So you could come to outer rectangle and say we would like the width and height. So let's check width and height and then position or the center. Next, we'd like to do something similar for the inner rectangle. We'd like to control the center, width, and height. And then lastly, for the frame color, notice there's 3 tabs, color, image, and settings. Over here, there's like subfolders for the tabs. We want to adjust the parameters in the color tab, but we'd like color, green, blue, and alpha. Notice, by the way, color is top left red, whereas the other parameters actually include the color in them. So this will give us the ability to control the color. And then also notice that output is clicked because on the frame color node, we want the output to be there. One other thing I'd like to point out is if you look at the text or like the parameter or the option folders, if you will, if you look at outer rectangle, notice that it's red. If you uncheck everything, it turns to gray. This is a little color indicator to let you know which nodes you've selected controls to include in your macro. So let's go back to our outer rectangle, which is gray, and we want center, width, and height. And close it. Do you want to save it? Yes. When you save a collection of nodes or a macro, it's all saved in a .setting file. We're going to call this a colored frame. Next, I'm going to come up to a text editor. In my case, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and we're just going to look at the file that this created. It creates a macro operator, and it lists which inputs you can access. So for the outer rectangle, we can access the center, width, and height. Next is for the inner rectangle, there's the center, width, and height. And then lastly, for the frame color node, there's the top left red, green, blue, and alpha. Then there's a single output. Remember, the output was for the entire macro was on the frame color node. And then this lists just the specifications for the nodes that are in our macro. Now let's delete that, or close that, I should say. Come back to Resolve and let's just delete this. What we're going to do now is take and drag and drop this setting file in. And this is our macro, which we can look in the upper left, and there are the controls. There's one thing I'd like to draw your attention to. It's a bit of a problem. We have center, width, height, center, width, height. The names aren't great because which center is for the outer and which center is for the inner. And actually, you don't want to have the inner and outer rectangles to have different centers. So that's a bit of a problem. But if you want to, you can control the width of the outer rectangle, the height of the outer rectangle. You can click and change the color of the frame as well. And there's no way to control the width necessarily. I mean, you can kind of by coming over here and adjusting the width of the inner, but it would be nicer if there was a single number called width, and that would control the width of the entire frame. So what we're going to now do is go back to the initial macro, delete this. I'm just going to do undo until, there we go. We're back to where we started. So how do we do this? One really neat way is with adding custom controls. So on frame color, we know we want to include the ability to change the color. But if on any node, by the way, what I'm about to do works on any node. If you right click, you can go to edit controls. Here is a way for you to create your own sliders and dials and other things like that to include over here. And it's going to be included in a tab called user. So the first one is, let's call it frame width. And a good idea might be to spell it correctly. So the ID, or that would appear on the node panel here, is frame width without spaces. It's a number. The default is, let's say, 0.1. And the range can be from 0 to 1. And what's allowed is from 0 to 1. And for the input, let's use a slider control. That's like for the 4 colors here. If you look at the red, green, blue, and alpha, those are slider controls. Hit OK. Now you will see there's a new tab called User, and there's a frame width. Defaults to 0.1, which you can now adjust, and it's even keyframeable. So let's come back to frame color, right click, go up to edit controls, and we're going to add another one. Let's do frame height. It's also going to be a number on the user page. Default is how about also 0.1, range 0 to 1, and allowed 0 to 1. Remember, these are fractions of the width and height. It's going to also be a slider control. Okay, now we have frame width, frame height. Next, we want to add the thickness. So we're going to come back to edit controls, and let's call this thickness. It's going to be a number, and let's say the default is 0.01, range is 0 to 1, and allowed is 0 to 1. By the way, we could have the thickness be an integer, like a number of pixels. That would require a little bit more calculation in the expressions, or you could do a percent here, and it's really up to you, whichever you're most comfortable with. So I'm going to use a slider control for the thickness, appear on the user page, and when I click OK, you'll see it appear over there. There we go. We have width, height, and thickness. Now, if you come over to color, we have the background color. Oh, also center. I almost forgot that. We need the ability to adjust the center of this. So we're going to right click, edit controls. We're going to select point, and we're going to call this center. And we want it to have an offset control. And let's default to 0.5, 0.5. So it will by default appear in the middle of the screen. So there you go. Now, what we would like to do is use these numbers to create the rectangles for us. So rather than coming to outer rectangle and dialing in the numbers, inner rectangle and dialing in the numbers, it would be great if all we did was specify the width, height, and thickness, and these just automatically updated. So how can we do that? So click on frame color and let's pin this. There, that way it will always appear in the inspector. Let's go to the outer rectangle. We'd like the center of the outer rectangle here to be the same as the center down there. Here's how you do that. Right click on this and go to expression. And what this does is rather than you type in the numbers that you want, you can now calculate the numbers you want. You can calculate it by typing in a little a line of code here, or there's this little plus. If you grab the plus and come down to center and hover over it and let up, what this will now do is say whatever is the center for the frame color node, use that value. This in After Effects, I think they call that a pick whip, but it's a nice way to be able to not have to memorize the names for all these numbers, just say add that value. Let's do that on inner rectangle too. We'd like to center the center of the inner rectangle to be the same as the center of the outer rectangle, and we'd like that to be the center control that we added here. So let's right click, expression, grab the plus, and mouse over the value you want it to be. Let's go back to outer rectangle, width and height. We would like that to be the frame width and frame height. So we're going to go to width, use expression, and height, use expression. So for the width, grab the plus, come down to frame width. For height, grab the plus, come down to frame height. There we go. Now the frame height and width right now are quite small, so I can just increase the size of those. And you can see it's changing let me display the outer rectangle to the left here. So as you adjust the frame width, the mask or the outer rectangle mask also changes. So that's great. Now let's come to the inner rectangle. And for the width and height, what we're going to do is use the same frame and width, but we're going to make it a little bit smaller by the thickness amount. So width, let's take that. So that is the same width as the outer rectangle, but we want it to be a little bit smaller. So we're going to do minus, and then we'd like to subtract the thickness. So we're going to take the plus, put it over thickness, and now we have the expression. You could type this in by hand if you're really good at remembering names and things like this, but the little drag and drop plus sign, the little drag and hover thing like that is a really convenient tool. So it took the frame width and it subtracted the thickness. We're going to now do the same thing for the height. Take the frame height and we're going to subtract the thickness. There we go. Let's increase the size of the thickness. And does the position work? It does. Now we come to the one last little adjustment we need to make. Because these are all percent based, and the width is 19 by 20, and the height is 1080. 1% of the width is different than 1% of the height. So if we say the thickness, we'd like it to be 0.1, it's gonna have a different number of pixels horizontally than vertically. So the way to fix that is let's come to the height. And when you're working with HD or 4K footage, the aspect ratio is 16 by 9. So if we took the height and just took the thickness actually and scaled it by the aspect ratio, we'll get the same number of pixels here and there. I'll let you riddle this out, but if you multiply it by 16 by 9, you now get the same number of pixels vertically as horizontally. So now if you adjust the thickness, it's a nice looking uniform thickness throughout the entire frame. Now that we've done this, let's go through and save it. We're going to select the 3 nodes, right click and come to macro and create macro. Now let's call this macro colored frame. And what we're going to do is come down to the frame color. Remember, each one of these subfolders, if you will, corresponds to a tab on the frame color node. So if you select frame color, you can see there's 4 tabs: color, image, user, settings. Here they call them color, image, user, common. I don't know why they don't match settings with settings, but what can you do? So we're going to come to user controls, and we would like to export all of these. But underneath the color tab, we'd also like to include the color. And so for the color, we'd like to include the top left color is what you use when you're working with a solid color. So we'd like to include the top left red, green, blue, and alpha. So we have all those, and you want your output, and then close. Do you want to save it? I really do. So we're going to come back to our folder, and we're going to overwrite the colored frame.setting file with this one. Save and overwrite. Now, if you open this file, you will see that a lot of these things have been updated. Like here, for example, the frame height, which defaults to 0.74, comes from the frame color node. Because remember, we added these custom controls to the frame color node. It defaults to 0.74. You can change the default if you'd like. So here, let's see if there's anything we'd want to change. For now, let's not change anything. We've seen the file, And if you ever want to do some more customizations, you might need to go in and dig into the file a little bit. And after you do it a few times, it becomes second nature. We're going to delete all this. To demonstrate it, we're going to take the colored frame.setting file and drag it in. Here we have colored frame, and look at the controls we have over here. We display it on the left. We have the color picker, so we can pick whatever color we'd like. And it updates the frame. You can change the width of the frame, the height, and the thickness, and even the position. Right now, the default position is not 0.5, so that's something we might want to fix. So here, what would be a good thing to do is let's have a default width of 0.5, height of 0.5, and for a thickness, how about 0.03? That looks like a nice, good frame. So for the color, we could default to white. Why don't we? Let's select white and save that. Let's say these are the default values that we would like to use. The only thing you'll really need to memorize is the thickness to be 0.03. Come back to our file and look at the inputs. The frame color, the red is 0.05 by default, the green is 0.36, and the blue is 0.52. We can update the defaults right here. Say we'd like the default red, green, and blue to be 1, and save. Now, if we come down for alpha, we'd like it to have a default of 1. We want it to be opaque. The frame width, let's default that to be 0.5, and the frame height also to be 0.5. And the frame thickness, let's do 0.03, and the center to be 0.5. Now let's save that, come back to Fusion, and drag and drop the file in, and there you go. You now have, oh my goodness, what happened? Okay, I'm now going through and double clicking each parameter, and it then resets it to the default. But this is interesting. If you drag the file in, while we know what the default values are, that's not the initial values. The initial values are different than the default values. To get the default, you always just double click on any parameter name, and it will reset it to a default. So we need to correct the initial values. Back to the file. Here we go. And we set the default inputs for the controls. And if we come down here and look at the tools, we see, for example, this has different values. And so this is an interesting thing, actually, that I didn't expect, that you would be able to have different initial ones than default ones. So for the center, let's have a default of 0.5. For the width and height, let's have a default of 0.5. Actually, we don't need to type in the numbers to the outer rectangle, inner rectangle, and everything. It all comes down to the values of the color. Because if you look at the outer rectangle, there's this thing called expression. So the value is ignored if there's an expression. So it uses the expression, and it gets the frame height, width, and center from the frame color node. So let's scroll down to the frame color. Here we look at the width and height. The width and height of the overall background image is 1920 by 1080, which we'd like to have. Look at the color. The top left red, green, and blue is not initially set to white. So we're going to set that to white. And then there is, under user controls, we have a width, which we'd like to set a default value of the width to 0.03. There's a frame height, which we'd like to set the default value to be 0.5. I'm sorry, I confused with thickness. So the default for the width should be 0.5. The height should be 0.5. The thickness should have a default value of 0.03. And the center is 0.5. Let's save that. Come back to Fusion, drag and drop this in, and display it. And it's almost correct. The width and height are still not default, and neither is the thickness. So I must be missing something. Let's go back to the file one more time and fix this once and for all. So if we come up to the top, we see our input controls. The default values that we've typed in here are correct, which we confirmed by double-clicking on the parameter names, and it did fix itself. Now we're coming to the tools, the outer rectangle, 0.5, but there's also the expression. The center for the inner rectangle mask has a value here, but it's using the expression. Like here, 0.483, 0.628. Drag and drop this in. 0.483, yeah, so there must be some numbers that I missed. Come back here. We have the expression, so the key thing is the background node. Here we have the height, the top left red, green, blue, frame width, frame height. We'd like the frame width to be 0.5, frame height to be 0.5, the thickness to be 0.03, and the center to be 0.5, 0.5. So this is a little bit interesting to me. So the inputs here these are the default inputs, or the initial inputs, but not the defaults. And down here, there are some initial controls as well. Here, the initial control for the width is a half, height is a half, thickness is 0.03, and the center is a half and a half. So we changed it twice. I'm not sure if one is more important than the others, but we'll see. Drag and drop this in, display it, and now it's doing exactly what we want. It has the initial values that we'd like, and you can now go through and change them to your liking. So you can change red, green, and blue. You can change even the alpha if you'd like, but the default is 1. Adjust the width and the height and even the thickness of this. And notice how the thickness is going in towards the center of the frame. And you can recenter it. And with all these, just double click on the label to reset it to the default value, to the default initial value. Now, if you want to install this so that it's always available when you start Resolve, you're going to come up to Help, Documentation, and Developer. Go to Fusion Templates and open the README. If you scroll down, there is a section here called Template Paths. This is telling you where to install that setting file so that it's always available. In my case, I'm on Windows, so I'm going to copy this path and let me paste it in, and my username is Socratica. And this is, we could call this a title or a generator, really, whichever you like. Oh, this must have been when I was playing around the other day. So we can take the file that we made, copy it, and paste it in here. And then if we come back to Resolve and close, let me delete this, and then restart, we can now see that this tool is available. If you go to the Edit page, let's create a timeline. Are we in a timeline? No, we have a default timeline, timeline 1. Let's just delete this. And if you come up to the toolbox and go into Titles and scroll down, you will see there should be a custom frame. Where would that go? There's a lot, so let's just go ahead and search for it. I think we call it a colored frame. There it is, a colored frame. You can see it, when you mouse and hover scrub over it, it will display what it currently is. Drag and drop it in, and there we go. One thing, by the way, that you'll notice is that it's a white border and a black background. So we would probably want to fix this so that the default alpha is actually 0, because a little concerning there. Let's see if there's anything behind this. Let's take a generator, bring a solid color underneath this, take this solid color, and let's just pick a blue. There we go. So initially, when I brought this in, I noticed the alpha was okay, I confused myself, and I hope I didn't confuse you. Initially, the alpha was 1, and I thought, oh my goodness, I needed to adjust the alpha, but it was the alpha of the frame, not the background. I always get a little bit confused because the default color is always black. I almost wish it would be a slightly different random color each time, but what can you do? So if we get rid of this solid color, and we bring in just our colored frame, it's black because it's transparent and there's nothing behind it. So now if we created a generator that was just called a solid color, and bring that in and give it a color that's not black, like let's do a pale red. There you go. And if you want, you can always change the color of this frame. Like you could always say, let's start off with the same background color. I clicking this, selecting that, and then maybe making it a little bit of a different shade to make it just blend in a little bit more. So there you go. This is how you make a macro. And by using custom controls, you can build the interface that you want. And here, notice how we were even able to rename it. Here, it's still called color. You might want to change that to say frame color. That's entirely up to you. To do that, you're just going to come back to the setting file and look for the tool and rename it. So the tools that we have, the outer rectangle, the inner rectangle, and the frame color. The frame color is, where is the name? Where is the name? Let's see. Well, I don't want to get too sidetracked. I think the main takeaway here is that this is how you can create your own custom macros, customize the interface to your liking, set the presets, set the default values, and set the initial values, which can be different. Package it up and go to Help, Documentation, Developer to find where you want to put that setting file so that it's always available in Resolve whenever you start this. That's all for now, and I will see you in the future.